Do you think Fed will keep interest rates high and just continue to bail out failing bank? If so, what effects would that have on the dollar? Yeah, it's a good question, Nathan. I think it really depends on the severity of the landing or whatever the yield curve is predicting. So if we go back to, so actually, let me go back a little further than that. I was just going to go back to 2020, but let's go all the way back to the mid 90s. That was the last time that the Fed raised rates, paused, and then started to drop rates again. Or did they start to drop rates? I know they raised rates in mid 90s. They paused, and we didn't get a recession. I can't recall if the next move was up or down. I think it was down, but I'm not positive. So that's the only time when the Fed has paused over the last like 40, 50 years where we didn't get a recession, but there was no inversion of the curve. The Fed has never paused with an inversion of the curve without us getting a recession. You see? So the question is really, what does that look like? If it looks, now let's go to 2020. If that looks like March of 2020, look, the Fed isn't going to keep rates high. There's no way. There's no way. They're going to drop rates straight back down to zero. It's the exact same playbook. And they're going to try to add liquidity, quote unquote, just like they did in March. But remember what happened? For those of you who are watching my channel, I'm sure you remember like it was yesterday. The Fed came out. They're supposed to meet on Wednesday. They had an emergency meeting on Sunday night. And they dropped rates, my memory serves me right, from 1% down to zero. And they came out and announced QE infinity. They said that they were going to commit to up to $1 trillion a day in repo, all of these things. And what did the market do the next day? Crashed down by like 1,500 points. And it continued to crash. Well, how? The Fed was injecting liquidity. You see what I mean? What happened is the market said, Fed, you can take your balance sheet to infinity and beyond, and we don't care because this is an overriding factor, the cerveza sickness. What happened is the government had to come out and do their CARES Act before it calmed the market down, and then you go ahead and get that rise up. But the rise up really, I don't think was a direct result of the Fed's balance sheet. It definitely wasn't, oh, great, now we have more reserves. We can go ahead and lend all this money. It was more so that instilling confidence. So again, your question there, will they keep rates high, just continue to bail? It depends. You know, if we have this soft landing, then I think they just keep rates where they are. Why drop them? Right? You've got inflation coming down, 9.1% all the way down to 3%, probably hover around between 2.5 and 3.5 for the next maybe 4 or 5 months, something like that. Or really until something significant changes, until we have something that would drive inflation a lot higher, like another CARES Act, stimmy, et cetera, or something that would drive inflation even lower than where it is right now, which would be some sort of black swan event or a hard landing. So I think if we get this soft landing thing, they just keep rates where they are because they're not high. I mean, rates are just historically average. We've got to remember that. And if unemployment doesn't go up significantly and inflation continues to come down, then yeah, why drop rates? Or why not just kind of keep them right around their historic average? That is not my base case. My base case is that the stuff hits the fan, just like the yield curve is predicting once it's no longer inverted. And that's really what forces them to drop back down, maybe even to zero. And we'll see how bad it gets. And that's when you get a disinflationary wave taking us back down under 2%. But that's what stokes the next wave of inflation, because that's what elicits the response from the government, just like we saw in 2020, that is taking effectively low velocity money, turning it into high velocity money, and giving us that next round of inflation. And who knows how high it goes? Does it go to 9, 10, 12? No clue. I think that's when we get price controls, though. But it's the same thing that you saw in the 1940s. This waves of inflation, same thing in the 1970s. Didn't go up in a straight line. It never, ever, ever, ever does. But this time, I think it's far more predicated upon government. It's far more predicated upon the central planners. When in the 1970s, and again, my good friend Lynn Alda has done a ton of work on this, you see that the majority of money supply increase above and beyond GDP was really coming from the banking system. So when you're trying to predict probabilities back then, you would have had much different variables. Where now I think the biggest variable is the government doing what they're doing in 2020? If they are, then expect another wave of inflation. If they aren't, then just expect inflation to kind of muddle along where it is right now as far as headline CPI. And if we have a black swan, or a hard landing, which is what the yield curve is predicting, then expect inflation to go sub 2%.